So welcome to part 2 of my chapter, Queering Subjectivities on the Praxis of Outing Gender, Race, Caste, and Class in Ethnographic Fieldwork in the 2013 published Sexuality Study edited by Sanjay Srivastava, and it is published by Oxford India Studies in Contemporary Society as a part of the series by Oxford University Press. So, the iconography of popular culture in contemporary India. Metrosexuals and glossy ladies, modern heteronormative subjectivities. And the glossy ladies, much of that research is based on Meenakshi Tapan's work on women and their discontents. And she is also from my department at DU. In the 20 minutes that the generic urban modern man has spent in front of the mirror, he has managed to cleanse his face with a soap-free plant-based gel, eliminate every whisker with a triple-bladed razor and cool blue foam, shape his wet look highlighted hair, clip, file, and buff his nails, smother the musk of his shaved armpits with aerosol deodorant, tweeze stray hair from his once unibrow, and apply an under-eye gel, cream, or serum for wrinkles and dark circles that he will not have for another 20 years. A spirituality article in a local English language daily reads, "He's shopping for glow packs, face scrubs, jewelry, embroidered kurtas, and sarongs, and he's happy changing nappies and cooking pasta for his wife." He is modern, whose feminized modes of consumption are meant to defang him of that old-world patriarchal masculinity that Leela Dubé describes, relegating women to the domestic sphere, polluting her through intercourse, normatively beating and battering her, justifying such cruelty as protecting the family's prestige, which hinges on her character and behavior. He is the metrosexual, pampered by women, according to the article, technology and capitalism, according to Mark Simpson, who originated this term metrosexual. He assimilates the role of the theatrical transvestite described in Catherine Hanson's 2004 historical narrative on theatrical transvestism in Parsi, Gujarati, and Marathi theater, 1850 to 1940. These, quote, young men of pleasing figure donned women's processes of beautification. Through the transvestite performer, she writes, the external look of the woman was regulated by minute attention to the detail of fashion and feminine accoutrement. His performance is not precisely emasculation per se, but a corporal feminization that displaces women by usurping heteronormative feminine agency. In the present day, the ubiquity of the iconography convinced Suresh that rebranding himself as a metrosexual would allow him to transcend the traditional expectations placed upon him at home. And Suresh is, as introduced in section 1, one of the interlocutors that I interview and write about in my broader research. And so the comparison that I'm making here between actual androgyny is transvestism. Theatrical transvestism is what I believe a metrosexual really is. The same as we have Madonna, or Beyonce. The strong feminine icons that are asserting a kind of masculinity. We have metrosexuals that are consuming femininity in order to not just become more powerful men, more modern men per se, but to also mark out what actually is feminine. So it makes feminine, these things, this is the feminine. So it makes a narrower box for women. One would argue that women have to be, therefore, ultra-feminine. And that's what we see, the ultra-feminine, ultra-sex symbol. The metrosexual's gender-bending performance does not erase, but reinforces patriarchal thinking. Like the theatrical transvestite, the metrosexual disrupts the apparent stasis of gender heteronormativity by reconfiguring his body to cross subjectivities, a transgression that contributes to his allure. After Hanson, the metrosexual has positioned the homoerotic gaze towards a refined, gender-bending performer who aroused a different kind of desire. The body, as Leela Abraham suggests in her treatise on contemporary cultural constructions of eusexuality in urban India, has emerged as the signifier of both traditional and modern social norms. The body has become a site for the expression of realization of modernity. Suresh, this interlocutor in my work, used his own body to access modernity. The body becomes a site to rearticulate power, since patriarchal masculinities find affirmation of their power in sexual conquest, writes Bell Hooks. Consumerism legitimates the reassertion of a sense of agency through consuming, and therefore, crucially, conquering the metrosexual. The use of consumer-marketed goods and services enhances the sensuality of the modern consumer, who now has a popular platform for the sexual objectification of the male body, writes Leela Abraham. His new sensuality appeals to both the heteronormative gaze of modern sexually liberated female consumers, that's from Leela Abraham, and additionally usurps a type of homoeroticism which flows into the homosocial and vice versa without disruption. And there's another writer of gay identity, Mr. Chowdhury, who writes about that from his research in southern India. Importantly, Gayatri Reddy's ethnography on the third gender, hijras or transgender, in India demonstrates that this fluid subjectivity does not disrupt the localized heteronormative patriarchy or heteropatriarchy, as Hansen calls it. Building on Sanjay Srivastava's work on the role of sex clinic literature in enticing urban poor men to access modernity through a reconfiguration of their bodies, the metrosexual emerges from consumerism as a site for the articulation of masculinity, gender relations, class, the national and commodity cultures of modernity, and the tension of urban life of the poor, writes Sanjay. Further, the mustache, hairy chest, aggressive posturing, hypermasculinity, the Ocellas, the natural lawbreaker, as psychoanalyst Sudhir Kakar calls him, this figure of the less recent iconic heroes like Bollywood star Amitabh Bachchan are apparent through their absence and distinctiveness from contemporary metrosexual androgyny. And here many of you might think of that hairy-chested, masculine figure of the more 70s, early 80s figure of Amitabh Bachchan versus the more global icon now of look at someone like Michael Jackson, who is, embodies androgyny. And I argue that he does that in the very same way as I said earlier that Madonna does that, but with his own complicated, gender, race, and class location and his, reality or to negotiate that for himself. So that's Michael Jackson's androgyny. The metrosexual emerges as another strategy of achieving and maintaining a sense of the masculine self in this is what Sanjay is writing, in a hostile and rapidly shifting context of norms around gender, and therefore satiates his need for security through participation in the rapacity of capital. And that's important. Again, he's saying, just as Bell Hooks had said, that this ability to participate in consumer culture gives people a sense of everyday power, but also a sense of stability through participation. Everybody's participating. In Sanjay's case, he's talking about the literature, the near sensual, sometimes borderline erotic nature of sex clinic literature that you find on the footpath. Is also reflected in the, skirting discussions of sex that are reflected in pop culture. And the metrosexual allows for men now to negotiate that. And one of the ways that they signify this is through, as my interlocutor does, dress themselves as this, refashion, reconfigure their bodies as something that the pop culture is now reflecting through icons like the new Pretty Boys, and in that I will include Shah Rukh Khan, through them reflecting another kind of power. And androgyny is a way for people to access that, but it's not androgyny, as I argue. It's a kind of just drag. It's a transvestism. It's putting on a dress. So it's a shifting culture of masculinities for us. But what's interesting is also in the background you have a city like Delhi. Indeed, the rate at which the ground beneath our feet changes in Delhi with massive infrastructure projects crossing most parts of the city presents itself as transitory and inconvenient. The deficiency of resources can make daily Delhi life feel hostile, and its populace powerless. Consumption imbues a sense of power, and assertion of personal agency, however limited and ephemeral, as Suresh's example demonstrates. Further, Srivastava reminds us that public space in India often proxies for private, intimate spaces in particularly claustrophobic cities where space is a commodity out of reach of, as Sanjay writes, most young people from non-middle class backgrounds. And this is certainly descriptive of the kind of background where my interlocutor Suresh comes from, where sharing space in the family home literally means sharing a bed with someone. So for Suresh, his extended family at home stands in stark contrast to the privacy he presently enjoyed having his own dwelling outside the watchful purview his parents maintained over his daily comings and goings. Suresh eventually came to embody his freedom, taking his cues from the Metrosexuals' consumer trends. As easy as acquiring a skin cream or branded undergarments, the Metrosexuals' desired disembodied peaks and portions offer these young consumers the opportunity to take him home and experience for themselves the sensual intimacy he displays publicly. He is a man of the people. If the poor can actually afford the materiality of this fantasy, writes Bell Hooks, at least they can exercise a spatial imagination. Consumers themselves, the dream of a class-free society where everyone can make it to the top, everyone can participate in consumerism, everyone can, shop at the mall. Moreover, consumers aspire to emulate those already empowered, ultimately reifying the elite monopoly and fixing modernity to the myth of meritocracy, a lesson Suresh learns through consuming metrosexual iconography, through which he commodifies himself to produce signifiers of his identity discernible to himself, reflected in these images. Though contested publicly, the body seems the only site of power and privacy. So what is he saying in this public culture? Peddling creamy crack. In a popular underwear advertisement hovering on billboards as well as plastered in shop windows, metro compartments, and throughout various contemporary fashion glossies in India, the metrosexual's bare torso and smooth, hairless upper thighs glisten like that of a boy, while his muscular abdomen and pectorals remind us that he sweats like a man. His pouting lips charm and disarm viewers. He reclines passively, fixing the gaze upon spectators, while the camera detracts from any branding by fixing our gaze upon his genitals. Like the fragmentation, as Meenakshi Tappan writes, of women's embodiment in consumer culture's glossy magazines, illuminatedly laid out by Tappan, I must say, in Living the Body, women and identity in contemporary India, the pieces of metrosexuals and disembodied modernity, his waxed chest, unconstructed coif, threaded brows, and velvety bleached skin, all require constant care, repair, and maintenance, as Tappan writes. Consider the care needed to maintain Suresh's white suede shoes trampling around India's dusty capital. The glossy ladies and metrosexuals tunnel through social conventions which overt adult sensuality by rendering these representations pre-pubertal and very young and childlike, writes Tappan, and she explains this very well about how they fulfill the central trope of consumerism, the myth of meritocracy, the belief that the social hierarchies revealed by free and fair competition must correspond to the natural scheme of things. And this is Andre Bette, another writer, and he writes a lot about class, also from the DU department. It's important to note within this department how there's this convergence about how the body becomes crafted by by the public imagination. And so you have researchers like Bette who looks at the state. You have researchers like Tappan who look at the body. You have researchers like Radhika Chopra who look at space and how space determines identity. So it's a pretty rich department. And I've tried to bring together several of these ideas and looking at how, pop culture today, globalization, this discourse between everybody being able to participate in the global market is a bit unfair and ugly. So I discuss a popular consumerist example of the valorization of fair skin as compared to the demonization of the dark and native other, an inferiority readily articulated by Suresh and the other interlocutors in this broader ethnography. Unfair and ugly. In a television advertisement for men's skin bleaching cream, Shah Rukh Khan, one of Bollywood's top stars, ridicules a dark boy on the street. Shah Rukh Khan even strikes a match from his dark, rough and tough skin while parading around with fair-skinned young women whom the protagonist baits by the end of the 40-second commercial. Finally, the wheatish boy is visibly a few shades lighter, much to Shah Rukh Khan's approval, which pleases fans/consumers. Anyone can be handsome. That's read as desirably fair-skinned. Shah Rukh Khan stumps in a second commercial for the same product, which opens with a dark, depressed boy who just wants to be like his icon on the red carpet. Shah Rukh Khan happily encourages the boy to bleach his skin, avoiding the girl's version, fair and lovely, since gender difference is natural and indelible despite modern concepts of equality. Supposedly they really did just repackage Fair and Lovely in a gray package and call it Fair and Handsome. Here, the signal for modern masculinity is fair skin that permits men to ascend to their birthright, that is, empowered by wealth and the ability to sexually subordinate women. Echoing Hansen in her discussion on theatrical transvestism, the skin bleaching cream Shah Rukh Khan endorses initially launched television advertisements that discouraged men from using existing creamy crack marketed to women while appropriating and thereby masculinizing women's patterns of consumption. This transvestism regulates heteropatriarchal feminine beautification. How might Suresh see himself reflected in those images? Tappan falls back on the explication that the localized racial construct of beauty and the idealized body was adopted through the experience of imperial subordination, that is, internalized oppression. Reading Graywall, 1996, Tappan suggests that the racialized aesthetic preferences for fair skin is a marketable commodity in contemporary India, was born out of the impact of Anglo-Irish statesman Edmund Burke's 1764, a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful, which equated beauty itself with wealth and whiteness, and objectified the white woman as its gold standard. In its wake, the next 2 centuries saw European intellectuals polarizing white-black and demonizing blackness to construct a knowledge system to control the other in order to rationalize white supremacy, and, importantly, devising its nexus within patriarchal and capitalist exploitation. This rationalization of supremacy seems so civil and objective that resistance, even critical thought itself, appears ugly and insane. Reflecting on my own struggles challenging this hegemony from within the academy has not been facile, or free of its power to silence and, crucially, therefore reproduce itself. As Amaka Eric Dyson writes, one must not act ugly, that is, outlandish, angry, diffident, surly, rage-filled, standoffish, etc. If one is in a minority, because the minority's very presence in academia was secured by the observance of civility and tolerance. So we're only there by the tolerance of the broader community in power. And so Tappan goes on to explain how, even in literature, whiteness was more openly equated with social power, which was just exported throughout the colonies and absorbed literally into and distilled into this creamy crack that people used to bleach their skin and try to assert, but also therefore reaffirm white power.